In this video, we'll talk about why we even need the IPA, not India Pale Ale or Integrated Performance Assessment. In this case, we're talking about the International Phonetic Alphabet. So we learned a little bit in the first week of a class about how languages change over time. That if we look back in history, we can see languages that currently sound very different from each other used to be the same. And this is because pronunciation changes rapidly. Sort of like an analogy from biology, languages mutate over time. Someone changes something, other people pick that up. Things get eroded or changed so that they become easier to say. And this process can happen differently in different places. So because of this, spelling tends to stay the same. People don't like to update the spelling just because they pronounce something differently now. They like to keep the spelling the way it was so that they can read older texts. Yet pronunciation changes at a pretty rapid pace. It changes fast enough that it would be very hard for you to understand anything that William Shakespeare was saying, even though you can understand most of what he's written, actually. And we can, as American speakers in the current age, we can read a lot of what Shakespeare wrote. Some consequences of this is that spelling becomes increasingly bad at representing pronunciation in human languages. A great example is this pair, where a learner of English would be very confused to find out that one word is pronounced laugh and that the other word is pronounced slaughter. In older forms of English, one would have been pronounced loch and the other would be pronounced slochter. So it would have been loch for both of them. But these became different. These words went down their own individual paths and became laugh and slaughter. We have these pairs like why is it great and meat, even though they're spelled the same. This has to do a little bit with the history of English, that there were competing dialects in the northern part and the southeastern part of the country, and that different words tended to get into the standard variety, which was called Chancery English, from different regions of the country, and they brought their own pronunciations with them. An even worse case would be this sort of example. There's a verb for when things kind of fall off sheet by sheet or layer by layer. We pronounce this word slough, to slough off. There's a swamp north of Monterey where we are. It's a great place to see otters and go kayaking, and that's called the Elkhorn Slough. And then there's a town in England which is pronounced Slough, where the British version of The Office took place, if you've ever seen that show. So here we have the exact same letter combination being pronounced slough, slew, and slough. There's nothing about the writing to actually give you a clue to the pronunciation. This is an even worse system than Mandarin Chinese, where at least the same character usually would have the same pronunciation, even if the character doesn't give you that much of a clue as to how it would be pronounced. This kind of detachment from spelling and pronunciation is not just a feature of English. It, of course, happens in every language over time because every language changes its pronunciation faster than it can update its writing system. In French, we have this kind of tongue twister, le vert vert va vers le vert vert. So all of these bolded words are pronounced exactly the same, even though this means the green worm goes toward the green glass. But vert, 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 they're all pronounced exactly the same, even though there's 4 different ways to spell that combination of sounds. In Russian, you have luk and luk, which are pronounced exactly the same. The first one means an onion, the second one means a meadow or a field, but even though they're spelled differently, the pronunciation is the same. In Irish, we have the same sound va, which is pronounced in wheel, war, and vota. So wheel is like there is or exists, war is great, and vota would be vote, right? And so the same sound is actually spelled in 3 different ways. So what would I need in order to make a perfect writing system for a language? If I were to come in fresh to a language community and to try to invent an alphabet or a writing system for them that would perfectly capture the way that they speak at this moment, what are some problems that I would want to fix in the writing systems that we see in the world, which are almost all pretty messy? The ideal would be a one-to-one sound-to-symbol correspondence, that every sound would have its own symbol, every symbol would have just one sound. So we would get rid of situations like this in English, where sight, cute, cello, and zar. We have one symbol that has 4 different sounds, s, k, ch, and silence. We would want to get rid of situations like this in English, where the same sound, f, is spelled GH, FF, PH, and F. These are very messy. They do capture something about the history of these words and where they came from, but they make it really difficult for learners to be able to learn how to read out loud or to write down a word that they know how to pronounce. So if we want to make or update an alphabet, the main question is, for any 2 given sounds that I hear with my ear, would I need to write them with 2 separate symbols or not? Could I keep them with just 1 symbol? Would I need 2 or 1? So if we think about this, would I need 2 separate symbols for the beginning sounds in the words which and which? For most speakers of American English, which and which have the exact same sound, what we would call a homophone. So in a perfect writing system, we wouldn't in any way spell these words differently. There's nothing about the sounds that's different, so they should be spelled exactly the same. But yet we see that one starts with a WH and one starts with a W. Well, this is a clue that, in fact, for some speakers of English, including in Appalachia, they've preserved an older contrast. The WH one is pronounced which, and the W one is pronounced which. And if I were to say which, that would be a totally different meaning if I were to switch them. So for Appalachian dialects, I would want 2 different symbols, one for wha, one for wa. For standard American English speakers, I wouldn't need 2 different symbols. I would just need one, wa, which would cover both of these words. What about the 2 different L's in the words leak and keel? Now, if you've never stopped to think about this, this might surprise you that those are 2 different L's. But if you think about it, in the word leak, la, 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 the la is sort of pronounced up against your teeth. And the L in the word keel, ol. The L is bunched up in the back of your mouth. So these are definitely 2 different sounds. Would I want to have 2 different symbols for these sounds? For English speakers, I probably wouldn't, because if I were to say leak or keel, it wouldn't change the meaning of the word. The contrast between la and la is not a meaningful contrast. So there's no way I could have a symbol for every possible variant of every sound. What I want is only different symbols when there's a meaningful contrast between them. So I might be able to keep one symbol to use both of those 2 sounds for leak and keel. What about these words? Here we currently have a single symbol, th, for the word baths and for the word bathes. So I have one symbol with 2 very different pronunciations, no matter what variety of English we're speaking. So th versus the. In this case, I would want 2 different symbols, because if I have the word thigh and the word thy, I couldn't switch those out and have it be the exact same word. Thy thigh is very different from thigh thy. So the and th are very meaningful differences, so I would need 2 symbols. So if I were to go through this process for the entire English language, what I would ideally get is an alphabet with 38 symbols, 38 letters, because there's 38 distinct sounds in the English language. And maybe 39 if we want to throw in one for that schwa if we feel like we needed it. But we only have 26 letters to work with, which results in terrible things, such as that we need 2 letters to represent a single sound, like ch, sh, and this 2-letter combination th is actually used to do 2 totally different sounds, th and the. An even worse example, so there's a saying in English, as per usual, and these days it's kind of common to say it slang, as per usual. Oh, I'll just have the usual. So people are shortening the word usual to just its first syllable, usual, or as per usual. There's actually no possible way to write that syllable, usual, in the English writing system. If I were to just write it us, it would become us, or use would be use. If I were to write usu to kind of show it should be usual, like from usual, that would be usu. I could maybe write it Y-U-Z-H, but it doesn't look anything at all like usual, and a lot of people wouldn't know how to pronounce that. The fact that we have a syllable that people say and our writing system gives us no way to even represent it is a sign that we have a terrible writing system, which poses a lot of challenges to learners. So it gets even more messy if I'm a bilingual or a multilingual person and I want to work across multiple languages or learn to write more than one language. So interestingly, Greek had a letter which looks sort of like the letter we call X. That's kind of two crossed lines. The word for this we spell in English CHI as the name of that letter. If you were used to talking about fraternities or maybe statistics, you're probably used to hearing this pronounced as chi, like chi squared or chi alpha lambda. But we write that chi with a CH. So we already see there's a lot of weird things that are going on. That sound, though, that we usually use CH to represent ch, Greek didn't have a sound for that. Really, Latin didn't either. So when the Latin alphabet was adapted from the Greek alphabet and then adapted to the various languages of Europe, they each had to come up with some crazy strategy to represent this ch sound, which Latin didn't really have. So in English, we write ch, ch. Spanish also uses ch to represent that ch sound. In Albanian and in Turkish, they write that same sound ch with a C with a little cedilla under it. In Basque, you get tx, ch. In Brazilian Portuguese, you represent ch with a T followed by an I or an E. In Italian, you can represent ch with a C followed by an I or an E. In German, you have to write tsch. In French, you have to write tch. In Hungarian, you have to write cs. In Polish, cz. In Croatian or Czech or Slovak, it would be C with a hot check over it. And in Norwegian, it's even KJ. So all of these crazy ways of writing are used to represent that same sound, the sound that we're used to, the ch sound. So learning back and forth between these languages or being multilingual gets very confusing when it comes to representing the sound. How do I write the sound which I hear, ch? The letter X, which the Romans sort of borrowed from Greek, although they used it to represent a very different sound than the Greeks did, the Romans used the Greek letter X to represent a sound x, like exit, which we still have. Chinese uses this letter X to represent a sound sh. English, we have x like exit, but we also have gz like exam, or we even have z like xylophone. In Portuguese or Catalan, this would be a sh sound, sometimes in Spanish too. In Spanish, this could be a h sound like Mexico. In Uzbek or Greek or Russian, this is a h sound, h, which there isn't really a good way to write that with English letters, kh maybe. In Albanian, x makes a z sound, and in French, it's a z sound, sort of like the xylophone in English. So we have the letter, or the sound ch being written in so many different ways. We have the letter X being used to represent so many different sounds. It even gets worse. So this ch sound is actually in one place in the mouth, but there's sounds that are further forward than that in the mouth that sometimes would get heard as a ch by an English speaker, such as the Polish ch. The Mandarin Chinese ch, which they write with ch, is also further forward than the English ch. So I have the ch in Mandarin, the ch in English, but these are actually two different sounds. There's a difference between ch and ch and ch. And I need a way to represent that difference that goes beyond just writing ch for both of them. And there's even sounds further back in the mouth that are very similar. Mandarin Chinese and Albanian use a q to represent the sound ch. Korean uses a j to represent j. And Croatian uses a c with an up slash over it to represent ch. So all of these different ch sounds, there's confusion between which version of the ch sound are we doing, exactly where in the mouth. Is it further forward or back? Then how to represent it. All of this massive confusion has led to the need for what we call the International Phonetic Alphabet. And here is the periodic table of consonants for them. So we'll talk about this more in the consonant video, but basically these columns are the places in the mouth, going from consonants that are pronounced at the very front of the mouth all the way to ones that are pronounced at the very back. The rows are kinds of consonants, nasal consonants which go through your nose, and then all of these different manners which we'll talk about. Then where we have a pair, there's a voiced version where the vocal cords are vibrating, b, and an unvoiced version where the vocal cords aren't vibrating, b, d, d. So this is the International Phonetic Alphabet, all of the consonants. These are all of the vowels, which we'll explore in depth in the vowels video, the possible vowels used in human languages. The National Phonetic Alphabet gives us way to represent tones. High tone, low tone, rising, falling. And it gives us little things that we can put above or underneath consonants or vowels to show a little bit more detailed information about how these things are being pronounced. Are they being pronounced against your teeth with a duh? Are they being pronounced with a puff of air? Tuh, duh. Are they being pronounced with a little W sound at the end? Dwa, dwa. With a y sound? Dja, dja, dre, dre, tra, da. All of these different little diacritic marks, we can call them. So this is the international system, and this system can be used to represent the sounds in any human language and to represent them faithfully. So we don't have to worry about, wait, which alphabet are we using? Which sound is the letter that looks like C supposed to be producing? We have an international agreed standard. The letter that looks like the letter C is always going to be an alveolar, palatal, voiceless plosive. So, ja, 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 ja. That's what the letter C does in the International Phonetic Alphabet, not to be confused with what it might do in some other language. So, because we have this potential confusion between a symbol being used to represent a letter that's used in somebody's alphabet versus a sound used in someone's pronunciation or speech, we have to distinguish between a phone and a graph. Now we all have another meaning for phone and another meaning for graph, but let's use a specific linguistic meaning. So these little pointy brackets that go around a letter show that I'm referring to a graph, which is a symbol used to represent sounds in somebody's writing system. So I'm talking about a letter or a spelled out word. I'm not talking about this thing being used as a pronunciation. So if I see this, a letter X with these point things, I'm supposed to, if I ever talk about that, what I'm trying to say is the letter X, pronounced as X, the letter X. Whereas a phone is these square brackets, and this is being used to represent a sound in the air, a phone, a speech sound. The study of these speech sounds is called phonetics, and that's where we get this word phone from. You've probably even heard of the word phonics, being a way of teaching literacy by thinking about the sounds and the symbols used to represent sounds. So if I see X in these square brackets, this is supposed to be talked about as if I'm saying the sound H. So this would be the letter X. This is the sound H, which again, it's hard to write with English letters. I'm just starting KH here, but it's this H sound, like the Loch Ness Monster or Johann Sebastian Bach. So here we have the letter J versus the sound Y. The graph J is pronounced in many different ways. It's pronounced as the sound J, the phone J, in the word spelled jive, J-I-V-E. It's pronounced as the sound H in the word jalapeno, pronounced or spelled J-A-L-A-P-E-N-O. The graph J is pronounced as the phone W in the word marijuana, spelled M-A-R-I-J-U-A-N-A. And the graph J is actually only pronounced as the sound Y in a few words in English, like hallelujah. So if you can remember that, that's the actual sound of the International Phonetic Alphabet symbol J. The phone J, on the other hand, which is the phone Y, because it's inside these square brackets, so I'm going to be talking about this as if it's the sound, y, y. Think of Scandinavian languages, ya, or German, ja. It's spelled as a Y with the graph Y in the word yup, spelled Y-U-P. It's spelled with the graph LL in the word tortilla. It's spelled as the graph J in the word hallelujah. And it actually doesn't have any spelling at all in the word Ohio. There is that y sound, Ohio, but it's not spelled at all in the writing system. So here we have a great example again of the mismatch between English letters and the sounds, between the graphs and the phones. Whereas the IPA would give us the opportunity to have a really perfect correspondence between sound and phone, or graph and phone. The graphs in the IPA always represent just a single sound, and a single sound can only be represented by one graph in the IPA. So this sets us up for this unit where we're going to be talking about teaching pronunciation. Why is pronunciation teaching important? Well, pronunciation teaching really is our projection of ourself out into the world. It's kind of our linguistic clothing or our hairstyle. Now, it might seem like we're being prejudiced or judgmental, but your hairstyle, if you wear the hairstyle on the left or the hairstyle on the right, tells something about you regardless of what's actually on the inside. The external clothing, the external material or matter with which you present yourself to the world says a lot about you, and it's what people will use to immediately make judgments about who you are and what kind of a person you are. Our pronunciation is the same way. Regardless of our thoughts or what's inside of us, our pronunciation is the material world that we present, the material form of our language, and it is what people will use to make judgments about us. It also has to do with how much of a burden we are for others to understand. When we communicate an idea using words and using grammar, but in pronunciations that listeners aren't used to, their brain has to work very hard to try to reconstruct what we are saying. They have to use a lot of knowledge about frequencies and real-world probabilities to try to make systematic adjustments with your accent and to try to go from your accented speech toward what they think you would be saying if you were speaking in their accent. That's actually a lot of work, and it's very hard for listeners to do this at the same time as to try to pay attention to and follow what you are saying. So this is having a strong accent actually imposes a significant burden on other people. And one of the reasons we might want to do accent work is to lessen the burden that others have to carry as they try to understand us. Because our pronunciation is a projection of ourself, it gives away our group memberships or our group affiliations, maybe a group that I'm not a member of, but a group that I like or feel affiliation with or attraction to. So it displays what groups we are or that we want to be a part of. Am I an American? Or do I want to sound like American? Do I want to kind of identify with Americans? What groups aren't we or we don't want to be a part of? Am I a Southerner? Do I want to sound like a Southerner? Or do I not want to sound like a Southerner? This will all be sort of given away in my accent. In terms of people's judgments of language proficiency, as much as we wish that people in the world really were listening to our vocabulary and analyzing how rich our vocabulary was, or that they were really listening to how consistently we're able to be producing the correct sentence structures with the correct verb endings, the immediate thing that people look to when deciding how proficient we are at a language is usually our pronunciation. People who have great pronunciation and actually struggle out with grammar are judged to be more proficient than people who have excellent, accurate grammar, but a pronunciation which people are not used to and not expecting. So that is just a reality in the world, that we're judged on our pronunciation. And pronunciation teaching, we're most amenable to changing our pronunciation or to altering our pronunciation in the first 6 months of our language learning. So it's an important thing, especially for those of us who want to be working with very beginning level learners of this language.